6:06 Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Donald Trump had a bad, awful day in court on Friday. When I welcome on into the program Hans von Spakovsky from the Heritage Foundation. Hans, always love having you on. So this is the headline. Then I'm going to allow you to fill in the blanks, although it's pretty self-explanatory. The headline, Donald Trump does not have absolute immunity from federal charges of trying to, quote, overturn the 2020 election. This judge is now ruling, they say, in a blow to the former president. And so, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. Give us the perspective of you.
Well, Donald Trump's been sued in almost a dozen lawsuits, one like by a Capitol Hill police officer, by the NAACP of all people, claiming, you know, they were injured in what happened on January 6th. And so he went to federal court to say, look, all these suits should be thrown out because I had presidential immunity as president. I was acting in my official capacity, and that's a recognized legal principle. And what happened was a three-judge panel of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, that's a federal appeals court that handles cases in the District of Columbia, said that no, these cases can proceed. The president acknowledged he was acting as a candidate on January 6th, and we're not going to issue a ruling otherwise, but he can raise that issue separately in all the different lawsuits. So they didn't toss it out whole. They said, no, you have to raise this in each of these separate suits. Now, the other thing they did was they said, our decision won't take effect for a week. And the reason for that is, look, this was just a three-judge panel of the Court of Appeals. So his lawyers now have the ability to go to the entire appeals court and ask them for what's called en banc review, in which the entire court, all the judges on the court, review the issue. And I have no doubt he'll probably do that.
This U.S. District Judge, Tanya Chutkan, you are far more, obviously, clearly, you have a lot of legal knowledge. What is your opinion so far of Tanya Chutkan? Because she, number one, has a lot of ties to Democrats, obviously, and the Biden family as well, through the University of Pennsylvania. I could go on. But, you know, what is your opinion so far of the way that she's running this case?
It's not a very good opinion. I have a very low opinion of it. I think she's a biased judge. I think she is acting unethically in not having recused herself from the file. And most importantly, that's because, look, she has handled a lot of the criminal prosecutions of the individuals who took place in January 6th. And in those cases, in open court, on the record, she has made some pretty nasty comments about Donald Trump. And that was a sign of her bias against Trump. And when this particular criminal case against Trump himself, filed by the Justice Department, got assigned to her, she should have recused herself because she had already shown her bias. And look, another example of it is the gag order that she has issued. You know, whether or not you like Donald Trump, whether or not you think he ought to be found guilty, he, like every other defendant, has a First Amendment right to defend themselves publicly. And that is particularly true when you are a leading presidential candidate. And yet she's basically saying, nope, you can't exercise your First Amendment rights and defend yourself publicly.
You know, when and you talk about clearly she has a bias. And so just as somebody who is an expert in this, let me ask you, how stunning is it that you do have this judge in the Jack Smith case where she, I mean, it's documented how biased she is. And so how, is there a right way to say this? How abnormal is it to have a judge with documented bias against a defendant in a case? I mean, is this particularly unique and unprecedented?
It's rare. I mean, it happens, but it's rare. And normally, judges in those situations do the right thing and recuse themselves. She's refusing to do that. And I think that tells you a lot about the politics of what's going on. Because, look, we have exactly the same situation, remember, in the New York civil case that's going on right now.
Letitia James.
The judge in that case also made similar remarks prior to that lawsuit coming before him about Donald Trump, and yet he not only hasn't recused himself, he's also issued a gag order against Trump.
Well, what is their rationale for the gag order? Because it seems to me like the president is just going out and defending himself, yet we have all these people on the left who are attacking the president at every turn. What's the rationale? They don't want the president to say bad things about them?
Well, for instance, in the New York case, Donald Trump was making very critical comments about the judge and his staff. Yeah. And the judge didn't like that and said, well, you can't do that. Again, he can't do that. I mean, under the First Amendment, he can't. Look, the gag orders are appropriate under only very limited circumstances. For example, if a defendant is doing things that could bias a jury, well, then maybe you can prevent the defendant from doing that. But like in the New York case, there is no jury. So it's just that the judge doesn't like the fact that his handling of the case is being criticized. Well, the whole point of the First Amendment, as you know, when it was put in, was to give Americans the ability to criticize the government and government officials. That was really important to the framers because they were being put in jail and arrested for criticizing British government officials when we were still a colony.
I know that our time is limited, so last question here. Hans von Spakovsky is joining us from the Heritage Foundation. So this case with Jack Smith, specifically about trying to overturn the election and all that, where do you see this going? I know this is going to be a broad, open-ended question, but where do you see this going? I mean, is this on track to ultimately lead to guilty Donald Trump being found guilty?
Yeah, I have to say it's an abusive lawsuit. He's trying to criminalize any candidate any time, questioning the outcome of an election, which, as you know, how many times a year do you see that happening? But he filed it in D.C., and D.C. is like 95% Democrat. They're counting on a biased jury who would find Donald Trump guilty no matter what the facts of the law is. Yep. So I think he's probably going to be found guilty, and his only hope is going to be on appeal. But it's going to be because of the political bias of the judge and the political bias of a jury. Any Republican that comes before them in the District of Columbia, I work there. I can tell you, they'll find you guilty no matter what you did or didn't do.
Well, and here's the thing, is that the more the evidence is clearly that there is bias here with this judge and the jury and, all of these things that they're doing to take out Donald Trump, the less credibility these proceedings have. And it just seems to me
that's right,
like that does nothing but actually help Donald Trump ultimately in the end, because it does lend credence to his claim, and I believe that it's true, that these are witch hunts. And Hans, I appreciate the call very much. I appreciate you phoning in here on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.